Great. Um, Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for taking the time to join this very topical and current webinar on artificial intelligence this evening. On behalf of SCORE Western Connecticut, we'd like to welcome you to this webinar. For those of you who are not familiar with SCORE, I want to take just a moment and tell you a little bit about us and our services. Secondly, a little bit about the logistics for how this webinar will run this evening. First off, SCORE is the nation's largest volunteer organization across the country in place to help small businesses like yourself. We've been in existence for 60 years. We primarily offer two services. One is one-on-one mentoring and advice to small business owners with an experienced certified business mentor. And secondly, we offer webinars and workshops, much like you will experience here in just a few moments. Everything we do is free, and everything we do and all the conversations that we have with you are confidential. And you can stay with us and come to as many sessions as you would like for no cost. It's a fantastic resource and one that you all should take advantage of. So, secondly, a little bit about tonight and our logistics for the evening. You are all on mute, and your cameras are not visible to us. That is just the way the webinar is set up. We will, in fact, have Q&A at the end of the session. If you have a question as you're going throughout the evening, put it in the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And we'll use that as the way to answer your questions as we get to the end of the evening. If it's not clear at that point, we may ask you to come off mute and ask that question for clarification. So this webinar is being recorded, so you will be able to go back and rewatch it again. It will be made available on our YouTube channel following this evening's event. So without further ado, I'd like to turn this evening's presentation over to David Rich. Just
Hello,
a little bit of background about David. He's been with SCORE for 1 year, but that does not mean he is not an expert in this field. He is a former small business, a current small business owner, and he has a multi-year experience in corporate America with companies such as Telstra, which is a large telecommunication company in Australia, as well as Visa and MasterCard. He's certified in the area of artificial intelligence, and he is equally important. He is on our national SCORE panel that is guiding and directing the future of how AI will be used inside of SCORE. So without further ado, I will turn you over to our expert and our presenter for this evening, David Rich. Over to you, David.
Thanks, Will. Appreciate that. Hello, everybody. I can't see you, but hopefully you can all see me. I'm going to share my screen, and give me a moment to do that, and then I'm going to present. So hopefully, share. Okay. Yes, there we go. And hopefully I'm going to start this PowerPoint. Okay, fantastic. We have a PowerPoint presentation. So today we're going to talk about artificial intelligence and how we're going to use that to help you with your small businesses, wherever you happen to be in your journey. If you're just thinking of an idea, you've started and you want to grow, or you're mature and you're looking to exit, or any aspect of that at all. So today we're going to cover these sort of topics. What is a large language model, which is sort of behind all of the aspects of various engines. And I'm going to very briefly touch on the investment that's been made into artificial intelligence to give you some context. We're going to look at a couple of different engines. We're going to sort of try and understand what they do and how they work, so you can interact with them in a more complete sort of manner. We're going to learn how to craft some effective prompts, and that's going to be the most important aspect, and ones that are in particular that are actionable for you in your small business, whether you're dog grooming or you're a jeweler or you're a retailer or you're a restaurateur or any business at all. And if we have time, we're going to discuss a little bit about personal branding towards the end. We're not going to cover some of the topics like around diversity and equity and inclusion, or AI governance and regulation and things of that nature. It's really going to be focused on the AI engines that are publicly available that you can use to help further your small businesses. So when we talk about large language models, what exactly are large language models? And you might have heard the expression, chat GPT. What is this GPT? It's generative pre-trained transformer. That's what it actually stands for. But essentially, it's a set of computers that are trained on vast, and when I say vast amounts of data, pretty much the entire internet, are capable of comprehending and generating and interacting with texts in ways that you think it might be a human, but of course it's not. It's a computer. But the key thing is it reacts to your input. If there was no input, there'd be no reaction. So it's really reacting to only what you put into it. So you provide the question or the input. Maybe you make an attachment or you put a URL in there, which is in effect a form of programming using natural language. And that's one of the cool things about all of this is it will interpret your natural language in English or Spanish or whatever your language may be, and it will convert that into programming language behind the scenes, which you won't know, and then it will present the answer it thinks you want back in the form of natural language so that you can read and understand it. But it's interfacing and it's sort of integrating your natural language. Again, it's your language. And to the extent that you give it something to react to, it will then react. So that input text, or sometimes called a prompt, is broken down into small units. They call them tokens, and those tokens are then analyzed, preceding the following words and the phrases, trained on millions, if not hundreds of millions or billions actually, of other articles and information that's out there in the internet, and it converts all of that, and it's based on what you prompt it to do. So the development of these large language models, you've heard some of them, ChatGPT. There's another one I'm going to be showing you today called Perplexity. Gemini is another big one, Copilot from Microsoft. They don't require fine tuning like a lot of models in the past. And they still call those, or they do still call those machine learning. What it does is you key in your natural language query and it will come back with a response. So prompt creation or prompt engineering is a sort of mix between a skill, a science, and an art, right? Because it's still relatively nascent of designing questions or instructions to coax the most accurate response that you need to enhance the output that you're looking for. So again, it's really down to what you're asking and how you're asking it as to whether or not it's going to be effective for you. Just some very brief context here. There's a significant amount of investment in artificial intelligence. For those, and I've met, we've had conversations with lots of different people about AI. And is it coming? Is it going? Is it going to stick? There's $1 trillion so far invested in this, over $1 trillion. It's not going anywhere. In fact, it's going to become more ingrained in what we do every single day. It's not going to go away, and it's being used in all these industries: healthcare, banking, financial services, insurance, law, retail, advertising, media, and the rest. Which means whatever field that you happen to be in your small business, artificial intelligence most likely is already being used there, mostly in the area of marketing and sales, which is certainly something a small business must be interested in, product and service development, again, perfectly relevant to small businesses, and service operations. And because of all that investment, there are lots and lots and lots of engines out there. I've been talking about a couple of the more popular ones that have made the press, like ChatGPT and Microsoft and the others. But here's just a small smattering of engines out there. Obviously, we're not going to go through this, pretty dense chart of information. The ones I've highlighted in blue are the ones that you've probably heard of or will have heard of in not too distant future. But there's lots and lots of them, right? And they're growing every single day. So just know that there's so many companies, there's so much investment that more and more is being developed on an almost daily basis. It's quite amazing, actually. So let's get to know, what are the capabilities, and there are some limitations, right? So it's not all plain sailing and it gives you the answers perfectly every time. So clearly, they're capable of understanding your language and how you write. They can do analysis, they can do pattern recognition, They're very versatile in content creation, but they do have bias. And we'll talk a little bit about that. And I have an example of bias to show you. They get cut off at certain dates, depending on which engine you use. They're not all as current as each other. Some will go and search the internet if you ask them to, some won't. And so you need to understand that. And it really does require you to be precise and unambiguous when you're asking it a question. And there's lots of ethical considerations. So privacy, plagiarism, copyright, hallucinations. I'll talk a little bit about hallucination as we go through this in mitigating bias. So there are things to be aware of and to be careful about, especially when it comes to things like plagiarism, privacy, and the bias. So you need to be aware how to mitigate those, and we'll talk about that too, which you can integrate into the prompts that you ask. So the art of creating effective prompts sort of rests on a number of different principles. So the first one really is they should be the prompt that you write. So the question, the query that you're entering into, whether it's ChatGPT or Perplexity, should be direct and precise. So avoid the ambiguity, because if it doesn't understand something, it'll make it up or it just won't answer. Again, I'll come back to the example of if you don't ask it any question, it won't do anything. So it's only responding to whatever you ask in the context that you've asked it. So therefore, you need to provide sufficient context. That's absolutely critical. And it's good to clearly define the expected result. I would like to produce a press release in the typical form of most press releases. I want to create a business plan and I want the output to look like a business plan for the restaurant industry. I want to create a bulleted point list of an analysis of a call that I was on, and here's the transcript. So describing what you want it to output will give you a better result. Giving it the context about I'm running a small jewelry business. I'm in this area. This is the type of jewelry that I sell, and it's retail as opposed to wholesale or anything else. That context will give you a better answer, as well as being direct and precise. So if you want to look at sort of pros and cons of these things, you could write something like, write a post about technology. It's pretty vague, and it will write post about who knows, right, in technology, versus write a 500-word blog post, if you're writing a blog post, to discuss the impact of artificial intelligence on modern healthcare, focusing on patient outcomes and data privacy. Clearly, that second prompt is going to give you a more specific answer than the first one. So you have to be very careful about that context. For data analysis, you could say, analyze my sales data. Okay. Or you could say, use Python or some other sort of program to analyze my 2020 to 2022 results, identify the trends, and then predict my Q3 sales figures. Again, specific, gives a very clear indication of what you're looking for, the output that you're looking for, and the context within which you can provide that answer. So you want to avoid the overly broad and vague prompts, and you can't assume that AI understands implicit contexts. So you can't just assume, and I'll give you an example of this as we go through, that you understand what it is you're trying to do or who you are or where you're coming from. You need to give it that context. So we then look at different types of techniques. So we can provide examples, and I think that's a really good thing to put away in your memory. If you walk away from this webinar and you only do one thing, giving it an example of what you want it to do or what you want it to output is always a good way of streamlining that output and giving you something more accurate and iterative refinement. So we'll talk a little bit about that. So ask it a question, it'll give you a response. Ask a follow-up question, because it's a session and it can understand the context of the rest of the preceding conversation that you've been having with it. And then there's ethical considerations, and we're going to get into that as well, particularly the bias and the ethical considerations. We have to make sure that they don't perpetuate stereotypes or misinformation. And we'll talk a little about sourcing and sources of the information as we go through this. So a little bit more technical, but I think it will give you a good example of practical uses of how to apply prompt design, prompt queries, prompt creation, right? So if you want to write a description about a product, let's just say it's a dress or it's swimwear or it's whatever it is you're manufacturing, or it's a piece of jewelry, or whatever it might be, you could provide some descriptions of dresses, highlighting key features such as materials, style, and occasion. And if you attached a picture of a dress you designed or a dress you'd like it to describe, that will give it a much, much better opportunity to understand the context and the output that you're seeking. So giving it that content and that example will really, really help. Another one is classification. The cool thing about this is you don't have to tell it to what's the sentiment of my customers who call me. It will categorize that sentiment for you. So if you're in a call center, or you have call logs of people who've been calling, or people have been leaving notes on your website, or feedback about products, or whatever it may be, you can put all that into a document, attach it to ChatGPT or Perplexity or whatever engine that you want to use, and say, please identify the sentiment from my customer call logs. What's their feeling, or what's the intent of all of these queries? Can you, classify them, and it will figure out, refunds, order status. And some people actually use it to classify emails. If you get a lot of email, classify my emails into headings, and it will invent the headings for you and then classify them under the headings it invented. So that's pretty handy as well. This is the one that about the iterative nature of asking questions. So at the beginning, give me 3 ideas for posts about something. So you would write what the post is, what more context is better than less context, being more specific versus being vague will give good output. And there'll be ideas for posts. I like the second idea. Write a post about that. So it will write a post, and you will see it there. Then you write, suggest hashtags and emojis to go with that post, and it will do that. And then lastly, or second lastly, suggest 4 image ideas for that post, or come up with 4 image ideas. And then it will say, then you could say, I like the third image, please, idea, please create that image, because it will create images depending on what artificial intelligence engine you use will determine how good it is at creating graphics for you and creating images. There are lots of different tools out there to do that as well. But the context here is it's an iterative conversation that you're building on and refining as you go, because the engine will understand that context. So bias, accuracy, and privacy. So how do we stop some bias? We can directly call it out in the prompt that we're giving it. In your response, you write to ChatGPT or whatever engine, avoid making assumptions based on personal attributes, such as race or gender, for example. Or give me 3 different perspectives on the following. In your response, explain how you came to your conclusions. You can actually ask it to identify areas of potential bias and call it out. Show the sources you relied on to come to your conclusions. In Perplexity, which is another engine that sort of competes, I guess, with ChatGPT, and I'll show you this as well as we go through the live examples, it will come up with the actual sources as embedded links and footnote them, and you can click on them whilst you're reading it, and it will take you to the article. So you can see where the sources came on that comprise the answer. So you can actually tell it to be aware of bias in your prompting. In terms of accuracy, treat it like a newbie, basically, someone who doesn't really understand your business and will learn about your business as it interacts more and more with you. So you can't assume it's correct. I make mistakes. And so this makes mistakes too. And the hallucinations, one way Perplexity works as an engine is you ask it a question or put a prompt in, and it will find the sources and then write the narrative. That's one way of doing it. A ChatGPT will write the narrative and then find the sources. Sometimes when it can't find the sources, it'll make them up. That's the hallucination. And you probably all read news articles and heard in the news about lawyers using, chat GPT for cases that they present in a courtroom, and only to find out that it invented the case. It invented the entire analysis and never really existed because of these hallucinations. So you do have to be aware. You can't assume it's right. You have to double check everything and make sure that what you're doing is accurate, and that you understand the sources. Now, in terms of privacy, if it's sensitive, personally identifiable information, I would never enter my social security number in there. I hope you wouldn't either. Anything you enter in there, with a few exceptions, is fair game for anyone else using those systems, not for other users necessarily, but it goes into the great amass of data that are used to train these models to come up with better and better answers to your queries. And so you would then be inputting anything that you do is inputting into that. So if it's really sensitive information and personally identifiable, don't do it. Simple as that. If it's non-public internal data, you can, in some of these engines, but not all of these engines, turn off the training mode. So in ChatGPT, down the bottom here, and you'll get this, I think we distribute this as part of or you'll be able to access this this presentation on SCORE's website. You can go to that URL, which is for OpenAI, which owns and manages ChatGPT, and turn off training mode, which means it doesn't store and doesn't use your input or outputs to train its model. So you can do that. And obviously, if it's public data, it's public, so it doesn't really make much difference. So now we're going to look at a specific example of bias, right? So we're going to ask ChatGPT to generate a prompt for a hyper-realistic image of a happy child with an apple. Now, look, this is the prompt. It's very specific. Create a hyper-realistic image of a happy child holding an apple. Child's eyes are bright and shiny with red apple. The setting is sunny, outdoor, perhaps backyard with a soft natural light. I'm using a Nikon D850 85mm lens with an ISO 200 and an aspect ratio of 3:4, etc. So it's a very specific, and for those of you who are in photography and film, you'll understand the technical specifications on that in that prompt, and that's what it produces, which is fantastic. It's a beautiful white boy, because there's no suggestion in the prompt that I asked for a picture of a boy, or that the boy should be any particular color or not. In other words, the AI engine just assumed I was asking for a white boy. Now, I have another prompt here. It's exactly the same as the first prompt, except with the additional word multi-ethnic on the first row, the first line. And with that, otherwise everything's the same, it produces a different image. So that is a very specific and clear example of bias. It's there. You can't assume it's not there. You really have to assume it is there. And so whenever you're reading anything or any output with regards to any of this, you have to assume that there's some bias in there. And according, per what I was mentioning earlier, you could say, don't make any assumptions about race or gender or whatever it is you don't want to be incorporating in terms of bias. So when we're looking at the AI prompts for clarity and precision, the key is the prompt itself. And these are the things, just to recap, be very clear and detailed. Right? Instead of saying help with the project, be more specific about what you need. I'm working on a specific project, right? Context. Could you provide an overview of the main events of this particular project? It happens to be the American Civil War, right? In that particular example. Ask it a specific question. Climate change effects versus what are the projected effects of climate change in Southeast Asian agriculture over the next decade, for example. Again, specificity is much better than vagueness. Context. I've mentioned this like numerous times, so I'm hoping I can't overstress how important the context is. Why doesn't this work? Versus my Java program to calculate the Fibonacci sequence isn't compiling. Here's the code snippet. Can you identify the errors for those in computer science and programming out there? Set a reasonable scope. Writing a book is one thing. Can you help me create an outline for a cookbook focused on Mediterranean diets is a much more specific scope. Again, it's focused, it's contextual, and it's has a level of specificity in it that is really quite important. So you don't want to be too vague, and you don't want to have overly broad requests. Can you provide an analysis of Van Gogh's use of color in Starry Night is much better than, hey, do something about art, right? It's not going to really provide you any context at all. So you have to spend quite a bit of time constructing your query. That's one of the takeaways from this is you can't just write it and just, oh yeah, I'll just ask it to do this. At the end of the day, when I first started using this myself, I would spend quite a lot of time in a Word document like Word, for Windows or whatever, drafting my question before I copied and pasted it into one of these language models, because the importance of the prompt itself really gives rise to whether you get anything interesting back or not. And you can't assume any personal experiences. Recommending a hobby is not as good as telling it what sort of hobbies you like and then recommending a hobby. And here's a good example of that. So here's a prompt. I write book, ChatGPT. I don't understand. I like fantasy and sci-fi books. Okay, how about Harry Potter? Versus, hi, I'm looking for a good book to read. Can you recommend me something? Sure. What kind of genre do you like? I like fantasy and sci-fi books. And now it says, okay, how about The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy? Now, although those two blue rectangles there, the user writes exactly the same thing. I like fantasy and sci-fi books in both of them. But the final output of the language model here is completely different. On one, it's recommending Harry Potter. On the other, it's recommending The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy because it's given further context. Now, it's not, I didn't actually ask it about this, but the point being is the precursor questions, the iterative nature of this will give rise to a different output, even if halfway through you ask exactly the same question, just like this. I like fantasy and sci-fi books. One answers one, and the other answer to the same question is completely different because of that context. Context is really very important. So iterative prompting is really quite key. Now, when you add specific examples, you generally get a more consistent and accurate output. And you can also do role prompting, which is the next sort of segue here. You can actually tell it to take on the role of something, which gives even more context to the answers that you're going to get. So for example, I'm a small business owner, practical applications for small business. I generate a list of the top 5 customer service questions for my online retail business. Or you are an accountant for a small business. You tell ChatGPT or the engine of choice, I have no experience with profit and loss statements. Please create a chart of accounts for a retail store. So you're giving it the persona. So it knows, okay, I'm focusing on accounting, and it will realize that it needs to go and focus on that part of its training data that is related to accounting, which will make it more accurate, quicker, more relevant. You're an expert in small business acquisitions. I'm buying a retail store, and what questions should I include in my due diligence questions? Again, you've given it a persona, and that persona will then contextualize the answer and give you a much better answer. It's the same with a lot of these that you can read for yourself when you get the deck from the SCORE website, or if you're reviewing it later. Generate a professional bio for the personal branding and networking. Resume enhancement, suggest improvements for my resume and my CV to highlight my experience in project management and leadership. So you can do a lot of different things here. A SWOT analysis case study. I'm a jewelry store. Please conduct a SWOT analysis for my new jewelry store, which we'll actually do as an example in a moment. So you can see that giving it the persona, giving it the context, and building that sort of response and telling it what sort of output you're looking for will help guide the machine learning algorithms to produce something that is most useful for you. So I'm going to I'm going to try and swap around a few things here, and I'm going to go and cut over to a ChatGPT and Perplexity session. So bear with me. Hopefully, I'll get all the technology right and I can Alt Tab, etc. But we're going to do 3 live examples. We're going to prepare a press release for a new product. We're going to conduct a due diligence, and we're going to create a SWOT analysis. All sorts of things that a small business owner might be interested in doing at some point or another. So the first one we're going to do is a press release. So I'm going to write in to ChatGPT, act as a public relations expert with 20 years of experience. You also have extensive experience with digital marketing, social media posting. That's the persona. I am a small business owner who owns a jewelry shop. There's some context. We have a new diamond engagement ring. Now we're getting more specific. Please write a 500-word press release, the output, uh, that is engaging and exciting. That's what I wanted to see coming out of what you do. The target audience, more specificity, is young, affluent, engaging couples looking for engagement rings. So I'm going to Alt Tab over to ChatGPT. Now, because I wasn't sure, sometimes these things, this is my internet connection going to ChatGPT, and if everything works, sometimes it works faster than other times. So I did do I preloaded this, but I'll do it again so you can see it actually working. So that's the prompt. That was in the PowerPoint deck I just showed you. Now, when you go to ChatGPT, what you'll tend to see is if you click on, you'll see, how can I help you today? There's paid versions and non-paid versions. This happens to be the paid version, but for this example, 3.5 is the free one, and ChatGPT 4 is the $20 a month one. For this, it doesn't matter, but for some things, it does matter. But we'll just focus on the press release. So I'm going to paste, there's the press release. And now we can see it do its thing. So I click on this little arrow here, which means sort of enter, and it's thinking. And sometimes it's shorter, it's faster or slower, which is why I preloaded it, because sometimes the internet from where I am isn't as fast as it might be. And so, yeah, there we go, for immediate release. So it's writing it, and there it is. And you can copy and paste it. It'll take, a minute or so to write it. Sometimes it's faster, depending on your internet connection. And once it's finished, you can literally highlight it and copy and paste it into a word editor of your choice. And at that point, you can edit it, you can modify it, you can change it, you can ask it follow-up questions. It's too long, it's too short. I've done this and I copied and pasted it. So I asked it for a 500-word press release and I copied and pasted it into a Word document. And it was 490, this is 497 words. So it was just under the 500-word count. And you can see how it's compiling it, and you can ask further follow-up questions. And some of that's back in the slide on the deck. Now, if I go to Perplexity, I happen to have it loaded there. So it's perplexity.ai. It's just another engine, right? I quite like this engine. This is what it would look like where knowledge begins. Ask me anything. So I'm going to paste that same one into here and hit, and this is it. This little arrow is enter for this particular version, and it's writing a different one, right? It's not the same output. You can use them to compare and contrast. This one's free. I haven't paid for this one at all. And there's the press release. Actually, it's interesting with this press release is that embedded in the press release here, you can see these are the sources. So it went off to this source to help influence its press release that it wrote for you. Latest news, lab grown demand, average engagement ring size. So it went off and saw other specific press releases about engagement rings. So that's pretty cool, actually, that it can do that. And it's embedded in here as footnotes as well. So you'll see one, and then here's another one it used in order to construct its answer. And this is a newswire. These are press releases about lots of press releases about different jewelers and jewelry. So again, I like this because you can see the sources, particularly good for research. Whereas ChatGPT, it gives you the narrative, which is a good narrative, but doesn't really give you the sources unless you start asking for the sources. So that's one example. I'm I'm going to switch back to PowerPoint. And now we're going to move on to the next example, which is due diligence. So now I want to buy a small business. I want to buy a franchise. I want to buy a retail outlet. I want to buy somebody else's business. I want to expand by buying somebody else's business. So you are an expert in small business acquisitions. I say to ChatGPT or Perplexity, I'm buying a retail store. What questions should I include in my due diligence requests? So I'll go back here to ChatGPT, and I haven't loaded it up beforehand because you never know, right? Best to be prepared, like a good scout. And I'm going to copy and paste it so you can see it actually working. So there's ChatGPT. That's its standard page that you will go to when you first use it. I've just pasted my exactly the same query in there. I hit enter, and it's thinking away, and there you go. So when you're buying, it's crucial to ensure you understand what you're purchasing, and it's created some categories. And in each category, it's got questions. So there's a set of questions about financials that you should ask, a set of questions about legal that you should ask, and so forth. Operations, inventory, customer data, employee information, all those sort of things. Now, if I go to, and it keeps on going, so it's quite extensive. Actually, you may decide it's too extensive or not extensive enough, or you may have further questions. On number 6, strategic fit and future prospects. Could you elaborate on what you mean by that? You could ask it, right? So you could iteratively build further questions into this particular session to further refine it. Now, when I go to, we'll go back to Perplexity. This again is the default screen that you would normally see for the free version. There's my prompt, exactly the same prompt as before. It's hard to read. And there you go, financial information. It's also categorized it, but it's actually made the questions a bit more user friendly. What were the company's gross revenues and net profits over the past 3 years? What were the profit margins? So it's a bit more extensive than a bit different than ChatGPT. So you could use both. And it even goes on to say it asks potential other questions you might be interested in. What are the most important financial metrics to review when acquiring a retail store? So you can click on that and it will give you the answer to that question. So not only will it answer your question, it will suggest other questions you might be interested in having asked that question, which will then give answers and will give you sources at the very, very top here, but also embed those sources as footnotes as you go through the document as well. So that's pretty interesting and it's very useful. So going back now to the third and final example is a SWOT analysis. This one's slightly different. So you're an expert in business and the use of SWOT analysis. I say to ChatGPT or Perplexity or Gemini or Copilot or any other one of these engines, please help me fill out a SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threat analysis, by asking me questions about my French bakery business. One at a time. You'll provide examples to help guide me. After each question, you will wait for my input before asking the next question, right? Different approach. You will accumulate my responses. I may ask for clarification, suggestions, or options, and so forth. And so that is a more specific, not just prompt, but also the way it's going to interact with you as a human. It's going to ask you, you've asked it, ask me one question, I'll answer it. I might ask clarifying questions. Once that's sorted, ask me the next question. So it actually, you're programming it in a different way. So I'm going to swap back to the ChatGPT. I did take the liberty of doing it before, the French bakery SWOT, and I will copy paste it so you can see it build it. Again, I click on ChatGPT at the top left there, and you can see that that's the standard default screen. I copy paste my query in there, which could have come from a Word document. It could have come from anywhere. I could type it. It doesn't really make any difference. Great. Let's get started by exploring the strengths of your French bakery business. So it defines, what are strengths? So it tells you this is what I'm looking for: strengths and positive attributes, etc. And here's an example. What unique skills do you have? So it prompts you, what would you put in here? And you would type in, my food is the best. Obviously, a bit trite. You wouldn't write that necessarily, but in the interest of time and the purposes of demonstration, that's a strong starting point, it says. I'm not sure how strong that starting point truly is, but what makes your food stand out as the best? That's the key. It's now asking you, it knows, it recognizes that that's too broad, it's trite. Right? It doesn't make my food is the best. Well, of course, my food's always going to be the best because I'm the chef, right? But what makes your food stand out the best? And you'll keep on going, and it will build and compile for you a SWOT analysis. Perplexity takes a slightly different approach. I'll go back to that start screen. Ask anything. I'm just pasting exactly. Didn't work. That's exactly the same prompt as before. I just copy pasted it in. Understood. I'm happy to guide you through. And you would then key in saying the same sort of things. What are the key strengths of your business? This could include a range of things, and it would do the same sort of thing, right? It would be iterative. You've asked it to pause. You can clarify questions and answers, and that becomes, and it will then compile that output for you, and you've told it what sort of output you want it to compile. So I'm now going to go back to the PowerPoint. And we're going to quickly, I've got a few minutes before I head over to Q&A, and I'll pause at that point. So the getting towards the end of this deck, I've got another 5 or 7 minutes to go. Creating personas. So I've talked about personas on the way through this. You're an accountant, you're a press release expert, you're a marketing expert, you're this, you're that, the other. What happens if I want it to be a David Rich expert? I'll substitute your own name there, right? Now, this can be really useful for creating a persona about you. Now, what I use ChatGPT, Perplexity, and other models quite often in refining my content or giving me some ideas that I further work, etc. But I always want it to write it in my voice. I don't want it to write it in its own voice or whatever voice it thinks is appropriate. And when I mean voice, I literally mean how would David Rich write something as opposed to how would you write the same thing? I've described, let's write something about topic A. I'll write the answer to topic A in my way. You'll write the answer to topic A in your way, and ChatGPT and Perplexity will write the answer to topic A in its way. So how do I get it to write in my style? So I'm going to go back here to ChatGPT. They've actually created a David Rich persona in ChatGPT. Now, I'll go back to for a moment, I'll go back to the Elegant Diamond Ring launch. So this was the one about act as a public relations expert and write me a press release about my new fantastic ring or piece of jewelry. Now, rewrite this in the style of James Joyce. And James Joyce, for those that don't know, was a famous writer last century, and he wrote in very flowery language, right? And there's a lot of literature about James Joyce, and he was a prolific writer, and there's lots of academic courses. So there's a lot of information about James Joyce in the internet. If I rewrite in the style of David Rich, it wouldn't really, there's nowhere near as much information about me as there is about James Joyce. So what is it? When I enter that in, for immediate dispersal, not release, right? And so it's changed the entire style and persona of the narrative in the voice of James Joyce. And you can see here within the heart of your business, a bastion of artisanship and the alchemy of adornment, there arises a novel creation, the eternal elegance. And you can see the language is completely different than what was there before. It gives you an example of voice and it gives you an example of character, right? So what I've done here, if you go to ChatGPT and down at the bottom there, you'll see Explore GPTs. If you click on that, right, assuming this all works with my internet connection and what have you, there we go. Now there are, earlier this year, OpenAI that manages ChatGPT allowed anybody to go and create their own GPT, right, for want of a better expression. And so you can search on hundreds and literally hundreds of GPTs that people have created. DAL-E is all about creating images. If you want to create images, you could use somebody else's image creator uh, um, prompting to translate your words into a prompt that the image generator embedded in this, called DAL-E, which is famous image generator, it will then convert your query into something that will be most applicable to generating an image using ChatGPT. And look, there's lots of these DAL-E prompt engineering sort of writing, Write for Me, and you can also search on things like prompt. So in here, people have written how to write a perfect prompt. You type something in, it will convert your prompt into a better prompt. So some are better than others. But for your own purposes, on the top right here, it says create. And when you click on create, you can create your own GPT. Now, I'm not going to create one from scratch. I'm going to take you to my one. It called itself Strategic FinTech Innovator. I can change that, but I'm going to edit this GPT just to show you what I've done. So I gave it a name. We actually generated the name. I gave it a bit of a description. I gave it an introduction. And then here under create, under configure, down the bottom here, I started attaching things. I attached some articles I've written, some blogs that I've written, a resume, a link to a video of me presenting, and things of that nature to give it context about me. And then under create here, I wrote always answer in the first person singular, always writing the voice of that's comparable to what you've seen in my writing that I attached. So you can create all those sorts of things. And then you save it in the top right. You don't have to publish it. So you don't have to share it. Mine are private. So only David Rich can see David Rich's GPT, but you can share them and anybody can use them. You would click update. I don't need to click on update. And so to give you an example, I'll go back now and I'll click on my my persona, and here it says Strategic FinTech Innovator, and I'll type in, please write a short bio about me. And it knows what to write. And so now it's thinking, hopefully, yeah, there we go. David Rich is this, that, and the other, based on the things I've already saved in there. And so this can be very useful for your own interconnected, networking, LinkedIn. It could be great for working in, if you're going to exhibitions or if you're going to conferences, writing articles that you want in your own voice becomes a really useful tool and not that hard to do. So you play around with it a little bit, which I'd also recommend is, and I was working with a school client earlier today on exactly this. They're building their vision and mission statements using ChatGPT, and they keyed in lots of bullet points, and we refined not the vision and mission output. We refined their query and their inputs, and ultimately we were on a Zoom chat like this, and it came up. We all agreed that it was a fantastic, based on their input, it synthesized all of that really nicely into a beautiful vision and mission statement, which they're now going to use as part of their business. And that's their voice, because they added things that gave ChatGPT more context about who they are and what they're trying to do, and it came up with a better response. So as we get towards the end of this, we've got about 10 minutes to go, and I'll wrap this up in a minute or so, and then we'll have questions. Tweaking prompts to optimize the output. Again, so I've sort of started alluding to this, but explain, you can, for stylization, you can say things like, explain this to me like a topic on a children's educational network show. You can say that. And it will give you not a dumbed down version, but a simpler version, especially if it's complex. I'm a software engineer using large language models for summarization, summarizing the following text in under 250 words. I like this one, and you should try it just to see what it does. Give your answer like an old-timey private investigator hunting down a case step by step, right? But you can really, the more context, the more specificity you can give it, the better it will understand and provide something that is useful for you. Formatting, I want you to use bullet points. Return as a JSON object for those who are watching and listening in who have a systems background. Use less technical terms. Right? It's too technical. I've got output from it before and it's been too technical. Rewrite for a layman, etc. Recency, you can say never give sources older than 2020 or any other year for that matter. If you don't know the answer, say you don't know. You can write that into your prompt. Provide instructions to get output from recent sources. Explain the latest advances in large language models to me is more likely to create to cite sources from 2017 versus explain the latest advances in large language models to me. Always cite your sources. Never cite sources older than 2020 gives more specific output, and only cite sources from 2020. Right? Restrictions. Only use academic papers. Right? Only use academic papers from Ivy League universities, for example, or whatever it is you want to confine it to. So, in summary, we focused on the diverse set of applications across that AI can be used across all various sectors. The importance of prompt creation engineering and enhancing your interaction. You've got to be aware of the ethical considerations and how to use it for business strategy and also personal branding. It's going to have a significant influence on pretty much everything that we do, our children and our children's children are going to do. And so we want to be responsible and ethical users to create useful outputs that are going to help us in our small businesses. So with that, I will pause and open it up to any questions. I'm not exactly sure. I think you can unmute yourselves. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. I think you can unmute yourselves and ask questions. I'll also have a look in the Q&A and see what I've got in here. Yes. Hello, I want to write some books. So if you want to write a book, you could use it as a ghostwriter. I haven't done that specifically, but there's no reason why you can't use one of these engines as a ghostwriter. Are you concerned with the bill at the CT legislature right now about AI and the impact of small businesses? I'm not particularly familiar with the bill in Connecticut. I know there's a significant amount of legislation being proposed in Congress and also in the European Union and various states. There's going to be a lot of regulation, and there should be, right? If we cast our mind back to 1992, 1991, when Mosaic came out with the first browser for the internet, and then that was followed by Netscape, and that was followed by Windows Explorer, and then we have Facebook and all the other things right now. We're trying to fight a battle to how is all that regulated? How does that fit in with free speech and the Constitution and all these other things? And there are constant discussions that are going on in Congress and states, in private business and enterprise. This won't be any different than that. Maybe we can get ahead of it a little bit, having gone through all of that experience with the internet in itself. So legislation, I don't have an issue with legislation as long as it's thought through. At the end of the day, this can be used by nefarious people for nefarious ends. We want to make sure that it doesn't happen, but we also want to avail ourselves of the advantages that we can glean from this as well. Can it be used for marketing? It absolutely can be used for marketing. So if you're talking about marketing strategies, if you're talking about content for marketing, if you're talking about visuals for marketing, images, you can create images. Again, provide the context, say what you're trying to do. I want to create an image that looks like this. Attach another image you like or you've had before. Yes, you can absolutely use it for marketing. It just depends on whereabouts in marketing that you'd want to be able to apply it to, and be specific and be contextual and try and explain, I'm doing marketing for this. Here is my target market. This is what I hope to achieve from my marketing. So give it the marketing strategy and it can come up with the tactics for you. Or I'm trying to define the strategy. Here's where I am in my business, and it can help define the strategy, and then you turn that into tactics. Yes, it can create marketing ads for emails. I think I just talked about that. Can it be used on computers and phones? Yes. You can download ChatGPT for your iPhone. You can download Perplexity as an app for your iPhone and others. So it's actually pretty cool. I didn't give you a demo on the phone, but yes, I don't have an Android. I haven't used an Android. I presume it's available, on the Android shop, like the Apple Store. But it's certainly available on Apple. You download it and you can use it. And with Copilot, it's from Microsoft. It's embedded into Microsoft Office. So when you're using Microsoft Office on your phone or on your laptop or your computer, it's embedded in there. It can actually help as you're writing a PowerPoint or a Word document or a spreadsheet. It's actually quite interesting like that. Um, what other questions are there? No legal issues. No legal issues in regards. It won't take words used by others. Oh, legal. So copyright infringement, patent infringement. Yes, there are concerns about all of that, which is why you need to be aware that there are concerns. What it produces, it's not so much the concern about the output as it is on the inputs. In other words, it's using a vast amount of data that's out there on the internet. Does it have the right to use, or do companies who create these things, have the right to use that data unfettered? Well, that's playing itself out in the courts. So I'm not going to opine on that other than to say you can opt out, right? And not have your work incorporated in their large language model learning algorithms. But the output it produces from that is unique pretty much every time. So it's not so much the output in my mind as it is the inputs. And should they be using certain inputs and not other inputs? Yes, they are valid questions, and you can see that playing out, right? And it's the same with artists in general and their relationship with companies like Spotify or other types of music aggregators, and the same with marketplaces and content in marketplaces for storefronts in marketplaces. So there's a few other relevant examples of where copyright, trademark, patent infringements might become evident. And that's another reason why we should have some clear legislation that helps us understand what's right and what's wrong, and where's the nice place to play in the sandbox, right? Um, are there any other? What's the time? Oh, we've got one more minute. I can do one more question. What is your favorite part of using AI as a small business owner, and why? Um, I working with small business owners, as I do as a mentor at SCORE, which is I love doing. It's great to see, like today, I was working with two people who were setting up a dance business, and we were refining the vision and the mission. And by helping think through the prompt, the questions that we were asking, we got to a great place in about 40 minutes, half an hour, 40 minutes or so, where the vision and the mission statements, they both looked at it and said, that's it. And that to me was like, great. It didn't create it, it synthesized it. It helped articulate it, helped them articulate what they already had in their head. And that's what I like about AI. That's a great question. So we're at the bottom of the hour. We're at the bottom of the hour. So I want to thank everybody for attending. I hope you all found this fantastically useful. I really enjoyed giving it. SCORE is a fantastic organization. If you're a small business and you need help with any aspect of your business at any stage of your business, please do reach out to a SCORE mentor in your area. I'm at Western Connecticut, along with Will, who's the chair of a Western Connecticut chapter. There's lots of chapters around the country, so please do. And there's lots of tools available on the website. We have a lot of webinars that are in person, as well as workshops that are in person, as well as these webinars. We have a workshop coming up in Bethel on what we call simple steps, which you can look out for, where you can attend at the Bethel Library. And we're presenting on how do you look at finances, how do you look at marketing, how do you look at business formation, and all those sorts of things. So great resources. Fantastic to have such a large group of people. And please do engage SCORE. We'd be happy to help. Thank you, everybody.